My brother forged our father's will and left me with nothing, so I took him to court and left him penniless. My father died on a Tuesday in February at 69 years old. Heart attack. He'd been mowing his lawn. He was dead before he hit the grass. My older brother Garrison called me to tell me. He'd been at the house when it happened. He was sobbing. He told me he'd ridden in the ambulance. He told me he'd handled everything. He told me he'd already been to Dad's lawyer to start the will process. I flew home from Seattle the next morning. The funeral was on Friday. The reading of the will was the following Monday. The thing about my brother Garrison is that he'd been my father's golden child his whole life. He'd lived 10 minutes from our parents. He'd visited every Sunday. He'd been the one to take Dad to his doctor's appointments after Mom died. I'd lived across the country for 14 years. I'd visited 3 times a year. I'd called Dad every Sunday. The will reading happened in our father's lawyer's office. The lawyer was a man named Mr. Caldwell, who'd been our father's lawyer for 32 years. He sat across from me and Garrison at a small conference table. He had a single document in front of him. He opened it. He read aloud. The will left everything to Garrison: the house, the savings, the investment accounts, the car, the boat, the contents of the safe deposit box, everything. I'd been mentioned in the will exactly once, as an acknowledgement of my daughter Persephone, who has chosen a path that does not require my support, and for whom I leave no inheritance. I sat there for a long time. Mr. Caldwell looked uncomfortable. Garrison looked at his hands. I asked one question. When was this will written? Mr. Caldwell looked at the date. March 15th of last year. I asked another question. Did you draft this will? Mr. Caldwell hesitated. He said, your father came in and signed it with 2 of my staff as witnesses. The will itself was drafted by another firm and brought in for signing. I asked which firm. He told me. It was a firm in our hometown I'd never heard of. I asked if he'd reviewed the will himself before my father signed. He said no. My father had told him it was a simple update and he'd already had it drafted. He'd told Mr. Caldwell it was time sensitive. The thing about my father is that he hated rushed paperwork. He told me my whole life that he never signed anything without his own lawyer reviewing it twice. The will I'd just heard read out loud was not a will my father would have signed. I drove to Garrison's house that night. We went to his kitchen. I closed the door. I said, Garrison, did you forge that will? His face moved through 3 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, then anger, then a calm I didn't trust. He said, what an insane thing to say to me right after our father died. Garrison, did you? Persephone, I would never. Dad updated his will because he was furious with you. You haven't been here. You haven't taken care of him. You don't deserve anything. He told me himself. Why didn't Dad tell me? Because he was a kind man and didn't want to hurt your feelings. I smiled. Garrison, have a good night. I drove back to my hotel. I sat on my bed and made a list of everyone in my father's life who might know something. I started calling them the next morning. His best friend Reginald, his old golf buddies, his neighbor of 28 years, his pastor, my mother's sister. I asked them all the same question. Had my father ever expressed disappointment in me? Every single one of them said no. Every single one of them said my father had bragged about me constantly. Then Reginald told me something I hadn't expected. He said, Persephone, your father showed me his will 3 years ago. I helped him organize his papers. I saw the will. It split everything 50-50 between you and Garrison, with one specific provision. What provision? Your father added a clause 6 months before he died that if either of you contested the will or behaved badly during probate, the other would receive the full estate. I called Mr. Caldwell. I asked if he had a copy of my father's original will. He said yes, the one from 3 years ago. I asked if he could send it to me. The original will looked nothing like the will that had been read at the office. The original was 11 pages. The new one was 4. The original had specific clauses I'd recognized as my father's voice. The new one had vague language. The original was signed by my father in his looping, careful signature. The new one was signed in what looked like a younger person's handwriting. I hired a forensic document examiner. He came back to me in 3 weeks with his findings. The new will had been forged. The signature was a digital copy. The notary stamp was real, but the notary had not actually been in the room when the signature was applied. The witnesses listed had been Mr. Caldwell's office staff, but they hadn't been there for the actual signing. The whole thing had been a scam. I filed suit against Garrison in March. The case took 18 months. Garrison hired 3 different lawyers. He went through his savings paying them. He tried to settle 4 different times. I refused. The trial happened in September of last year. The forensic document examiner testified. Mr. Caldwell testified. Reginald testified. The jury came back in 2 hours. They found the new will to be fraudulent. They reinstated the original will. The original will gave me everything, because Garrison had contested the will and behaved badly during probate. The provision my father had added 6 months before his death triggered. Garrison received nothing. The judge also ordered Garrison to pay my legal fees, $340,000. Garrison declared bankruptcy 4 months later. He lost his house, he lost his retirement, he lost everything. Garrison has not spoken to me since the verdict. But here's what nobody at the trial knew. The reason my father had added that provision 6 months before his death wasn't a hunch. He'd been suspicious of Garrison for years. Reginald gave me a sealed envelope last week. My father had given it to him in January, 2 weeks before he died. He told Reginald to give it to me only if I won the case against Garrison. I won. Reginald handed me the envelope yesterday. I opened it last night. It's not just about the money Garrison stole. I sat in my hotel room with the envelope on the bed next to me. I picked it up and turned it over. My father's handwriting was on the front, just my name, Persephone, and I noticed right away that the letters were shaky, not sloppy, not careless, shaky the way an old man's hand gets when he's trying really hard to keep it steady. I almost didn't open it because I was scared, not of Garrison, not of what he'd done. I was scared of what my father might have written about me. I kept thinking about what Garrison had said in his kitchen that night, that Dad was furious with me. There was this small, ugly part of me that kept whispering, what if there's a piece of truth in it? What if Dad's letter says, I wish you'd come home more? I sat with that fear for maybe 20 minutes. Then I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, folded twice, a printed bank statement with certain lines highlighted in yellow marker, and a photograph I had never seen before. I picked up the photograph first. It was a picture of my father sitting at his kitchen table, the table I'd eaten breakfast at my whole childhood. There were papers spread out all over it, stacks of them. My father was sitting in his usual chair, wearing his reading glasses. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Reginald's handwriting, it said, "Ronan asked me to take this so someone would know he was working on it." I stared at that sentence for a long time. My father had asked his best friend to take a photograph of him working at his kitchen table, so someone would know, so there would be proof. I set the photo down and picked up the letter. My father's handwriting again. Shaky but clear. The letter started like this: Persephone, if you're reading this, then two things happened. I died, and your brother did what I was afraid he'd do. I had to stop reading after that first line. I put the letter down on the bed and pressed my hands against my face and just breathed, because in one sentence my father had told me everything. He knew. He knew before he died. He wasn't surprised by it. He'd been afraid of it, and he'd prepared for it. I picked the letter back up. He wrote that he'd discovered Garrison had been taking money from his accounts. It had started about 4 years before he died, just a few months after my mother Jocelyn passed. Garrison had power of attorney for medical decisions. My father had given him that after Mom died because Garrison lived close by. But Garrison had used that access to slowly work his way into my father's banking. He'd gotten himself added as a secondary holder on 2 of my father's accounts. He'd started making withdrawals. He'd started writing checks. My father wrote that by the time he figured out what was happening, Garrison had been doing it for over 2 years. He'd sat at that kitchen table, the same one in the photograph, and gone through every bank statement line by line. He'd tracked where the money went. And then came the part that broke me. My father wrote that he didn't confront Garrison. He wrote, "I know my son. If I confront him, he'll deny it, and he'll destroy the evidence. So I'm building a case the way Mr. Caldwell taught me, slowly, carefully. Every receipt, every withdrawal, every lie he told me about where the money went." My father, at 68 years old, sitting alone at his kitchen table after losing his wife, had been quietly building a case against his own son, not yelling, not crying to his friends, not calling me in a panic. He sat down with a highlighter and a stack of bank statements, and he did the work, because he knew that when he was gone, I'd be the one left standing in the mess. That's when it really hit me. My father wasn't some confused old man who got taken advantage of. He was a man who saw it clearly, who understood exactly what his own son was doing to him. And instead of falling apart, he chose to be patient. He chose to be smart. He spent the last months of his life sitting at that kitchen table documenting every dollar his son stole from him. Not for revenge, for me. I put the letter down and I cried. I cried harder than I did at his funeral, harder than I did at the verdict. I cried because I'd spent 14 years feeling guilty about living far away. I'd spent the last 2 years of this lawsuit wondering if maybe, somewhere deep down, he really had been disappointed in me. And the whole time, he had been sitting at that table working to make sure I'd be okay. After I got myself together, I picked up the bank statements. He'd gone through them with a yellow highlighter. Some had small notes in the margin in his handwriting, things like "did not authorize" or "was not at this store," or "Garrison said this was for groceries, but receipt doesn't match." I counted the highlighted lines, 47. 47 flagged transactions spread across 4 years. I added up the amounts as I went. Some were small, $40 at a gas station. Some were bigger. A check for $1,200 made out to Garrison with my father's signature on it, except my father had written next to the highlight, "I did not write this check." When I finished adding it all up, the total was over $90,000. $90,000 in small bites over 4 years. I picked up the letter again. There was a second page. My father wrote about the provision he'd added to the original will. He wrote, "I added the clause because I know Garrison will not be able to help himself. He will try to take everything. And when he does, the clause will give it all to you. Not because I love you more, but because you are the one who would never have taken it by force." My father had seen this coming. Not just the stealing, the will. He knew Garrison would try to forge a new will. He knew it with such certainty that he built a trap into the real one. He didn't hope for the best. He planned for the worst. I picked up my phone and called Reginald. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. I think he'd been waiting for me to call. I read him parts of the letter. When I finished, the line was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your father told me something the last time I saw him. He said, 'Reginald, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of what Garrison will do to Persephone after I'm gone.'" I closed my eyes. That sentence just sat in my chest like a stone. My father's last fear wasn't death. It was me. I asked Reginald why he didn't warn me before the trial. Why he let me walk into that courtroom not knowing the full story. Reginald said, "He made me promise. He said if I told you before the trial, you'd confront Garrison directly, and Garrison would find a way to spin it. He wanted the court to handle it first. Then he wanted you to have the full picture." My father had thought about this from every angle. He knew that if I'd seen those bank statements before the trial, I would have gone straight to Garrison's door and thrown them in his face. And Garrison would have twisted it, so he kept it separate. He let the forgery case stand on its own. I asked Reginald about the $90,000. I asked if my father had ever thought about going to the police. Reginald got quiet again. Then he said he didn't want his son arrested. He just wanted to make sure you got what was yours. My father loved his son enough to not want him in prison. And Garrison repaid that love by forging his will and trying to erase me from his last words. I thanked Reginald and hung up. I called my daughter Adeline. I told her the broad strokes, about the envelope, about the bank statements, about the fact that her grandfather had known what Garrison was doing. Adeline didn't interrupt me. She just listened. When I finished, the line was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she said, "Grandpa called me the Sunday before he died. He told me he loved me. He told me to always trust you. I thought he was just being sweet. Now I think he knew." I didn't say anything to that. I couldn't, because she was right. That Sunday phone call was him making sure. He'd been setting things in order. One phone call at a time, one letter at a time, one photograph at a time. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. I checked my voicemail. The first message was Garrison. His voice was strained and raw. He said, "Persephone, Reginald called me. He told me Dad left you an envelope. I need to know what's in it. Please call me back." The second voicemail was calmer, but the calm was the kind that sits on top of panic. "Seffi, whatever Dad wrote, you need to hear my side. Please, I'm begging you." The third voicemail was mostly nothing, just breathing, long, slow breaths. Then, right before the message ended, he said, "Don't go to the police, please." I called Reginald. I asked him straight out, "Why did you call Garrison?" Reginald didn't hesitate. I didn't tell him what was in it. I just told him the envelope had been delivered. "Your father wanted that too." He wrote it in a separate note to me. He said, "After you give Persephone the envelope, call Garrison and tell him she has it. Let him sit with that." I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, and I felt something cold move through my chest. chest. I said, Dad wanted Garrison to know I had it? Reginald said, your father wanted Garrison to feel what it's like to wait for someone else to decide your fate. My father, even from beyond the grave, had thought about this moment. He'd known Garrison would panic. He'd known the waiting would be its own kind of punishment. He hadn't done it out of cruelty. He'd done it because he knew his son. Around 2 in the afternoon, there was a knock on my door. Not a polite hotel knock. Hard and fast. I looked through the peephole. It was Garrison. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were red. He looked smaller than I remembered. I opened the door, but I didn't step back. I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway. He said, can I come in? I said, no. He blinked. Then he said, Seffi, please. I know what Dad probably wrote, but you don't understand the full picture. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him. I said, then tell me the full picture, right here. And he did. Once he started, he couldn't stop. He said his business had been failing for years. He said he'd been bleeding money for a long time before Mom died. He said he'd been too proud to tell anyone, too proud to ask Dad for a loan, too proud to admit that the son who stayed close, the son who was always there, was actually drowning. He said after Jocelyn died, he'd started borrowing from Dad's accounts. He called it borrowing. He said he always planned to pay it back. He said forging the will was a panic move. He knew the original will had that clause, and he knew that once the missing money was found, the clause would trigger and he'd get nothing. So he got rid of the original will and replaced it with one that gave him everything. He looked at me with those red eyes and he said, I'm not a bad person, Seffi. I'm a desperate one. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, Garrison, Dad knew. He knew the whole time. He tracked every dollar. He could have called the police. He didn't, because he was your father. I watched his face crumble. I kept going. But you didn't just steal his money, Garrison. You stole his will. You forged his last words. You took the one thing he wrote for both of us, and you erased me from it. You didn't just take from him. You tried to take me away from him after he was dead. Garrison didn't say anything. He put both his hands on the door frame like he needed it to hold him up. His knuckles went white. Then he whispered, what are you going to do? I said, I haven't decided yet. Go home, Garrison. He stood there for another few seconds. Then he turned around. He walked down the hallway without looking back. I closed the door. I locked it. I spent the next 2 days alone in that hotel room. I called Mr. Caldwell and asked what would happen if I brought the financial evidence to the authorities. He said Garrison could face felony charges, elder financial abuse, prison time. Then he said, your father chose not to pursue this, but legally, the statute of limitations hasn't expired. The choice is yours. I called Adeline. I told her about the felony charges, about prison, about the fact that Dad chose not to report it. She listened to all of it. Then she said, Mom, Grandpa left you that letter because he trusted you to make the right call, not his call, yours. He already made his choice while he was alive. Now it's your turn. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got in my car and drove to Garrison's apartment. It was a small rental in a part of town I didn't know well, nothing like the house he used to own. I parked out front and walked up and knocked. He opened the door. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him, thinner, grayer, like a man who'd been hollowed out from the inside. I held up the bank statements. I said, I could take these to the police. You know that. He nodded, slowly. I said, Dad tracked every single dollar, Garrison. He knew for years, and he still had Sunday dinner with you. He still let you drive him to his appointments. He still loved you, even knowing what you were doing. His eyes filled with tears. He said, I know. I said, but then you forged his will, and in that will, you wrote words pretending to be him. You wrote that he was disappointed in me. You put those words in a dead man's mouth, our father's mouth. That's what I can't forgive, Garrison. Not the money, the words. Garrison walked back to his couch and sat down hard. He put his face in his hands. His voice came out muffled and broken. He said, I wrote those words because I believed them. I believed you didn't deserve it. I believed I did, because I was here. I was the one who watched him get old. I was the one who cleaned out Mom's closet, and you got to live your life and call once a week and still be his favorite. I was right there and I was invisible. I felt the air leave my body. I stood very still for a long moment. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter. I unfolded it to the last page, and I read one line out loud, my father's words. Garrison has always been right beside me, and I have always been grateful, but I worry that he stayed close not because he loved me, but because he was afraid of what I'd think if he left. Persephone left, and I was proud of her for it. Not because leaving is better than staying, but because she did it even though it was hard. I hope someday Garrison understands that I loved him just as much. I just showed it differently. Garrison broke. There's no other word for it. He broke like something structural gave way inside him, and everything he'd been holding up just came down. He sobbed with his whole body, bent over on that couch in that small rental apartment with nothing left. I folded the letter and put it back in my bag. I said, I'm not going to the police, Garrison. Not because you deserve mercy, but because Dad already decided you didn't belong in prison, and I'm going to honor that. But you and I are done. You don't get to call me. You don't get to reach out to Adeline. You're not my brother anymore. You made that choice when you erased me from Dad's last words. I turned and walked to the door. Behind me, Garrison said, Seffi, wait. I stopped. He said, did Dad really say he loved me just as much? I looked back at him. He was still sitting on that couch, his face a mess, his hands shaking in his lap. I said, read the letter yourself. I'll leave a copy with Reginald. If you ever want to know what Dad actually thought of you, it's there. But you'll have to go ask for it, and you'll have to look Reginald in the eye when you do. I walked out and closed the door behind me. I flew home to Seattle the next day. Adeline picked me up from the airport. She looked over at me and asked, are you okay? I looked out the window at the highway and I said, I think Dad planned all of this. The clause, the letter, the timing. He knew exactly what Garrison would do, and he set it up so that no matter what happened, the truth would come out. He couldn't stop Garrison from being who he is, but he made sure I'd never wonder if he loved me. Adeline didn't say anything to that. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. I kept the original letter in my own fireproof safe at home. I put my father's photograph on my mantle, the one of him sitting at that kitchen table with all those papers spread out in front of him. I didn't hear from Garrison again. 6 months later, Reginald called me. He said, Garrison came by today. He asked for the copy of the letter. I asked how he looked. Reginald said, like a man who finally ran out of people to blame. There's one more thing. The last line of my father's letter, the part I haven't read to anyone, says, Persephone, you were never too far away. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, and I was always proud. Love, Dad.